Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Tech Talk with Provakil, where we are speaking to Janani Dinesh, GC of Dvara Holdings, on her journey of building a legal tech roadmap for Dvara Holdings, a group pioneering initiatives in the financial inclusion space. Today's session, which is session 4 that we've done on the legal tech journey with our partners Provakil, is all about understanding the process of building a tech roadmap as an in-house counsel. Really delighted to have Janani on the call with us, on the webinar. She is currently General Counsel of Dvara Holdings, which is formerly IFMR Trust. She's a qualified corporate lawyer with over 12 years of experience advising entities on their legal, general, corporate, and regulatory requirements. She heads the legal and compliance function at Dvara Holdings, and prior to that, she was a key member of the corporate and transactional team at IC Universal, where she advised domestic and foreign entities on investments and acquisitions. She also worked with Hindustan Unilever, handling their litigation and dispute management portfolio for the Southern region and providing category legal support to the home and personal care division. We also have on the webinar Shashwat Sikka, co-founder of Provakil. Shashwat is an experienced business development professional. He's passionate about sales, marketing, and growth at startups. He loves engaging with people, problem solving, and being a catalyst for building new products and businesses. He's currently building Provakil, which is one of the pioneering legal tech startups in the India market, focusing on transforming legal operations for enterprises and offering next generation tools for digital contracting, litigation, IP, and compliance management. The platform that they work with is equipped with advanced ML AI capabilities for intelligent document review, IP watch and search, case law research, and other use cases, and is trusted by over 150 companies and 100+ law firms. Back to Janani. Janani moved from being an external lawyer to in-house counsel in search for the challenge of becoming more of a business enabler. And she's been at the forefront of supporting her business across its portfolio in delivering fresh fintech solutions to its customer base. And in this webinar, she explains how she had to get to grips with how the business functioned, its agility and speed in delivering products, and how she, as head of the legal and compliance function, had to adapt and match the business's speed and agility to help them scale. Welcome, Janani and Shashwat, and thanks for joining us for this discussion today.
Thank you so much, Vikas, for that lovely introduction. Hi, Shashwat.
Hey, Janani.
Super. So we're going to kick off asking you, Janani, on given your background at Hindustan Unilever and in a law firm, what made you take up the role at Dvara Holdings?
Okay, that's a very interesting question to start off with. So primarily when I started working with Unilever, right, it was a very business first approach. So whether be it the kind of training programs that they had or the interactions amongst the teams, it always had the way the program itself was structured, even the training program was structured, was giving insights into business and customer connects and having a business first approach. So that work I thoroughly enjoyed. And when I moved to IC Universal Legal, which is a law firm which predominantly focuses on transaction work and M&A and PEs, I got to understand the nitty-gritties of what goes on in investments and acquisition transactions and corporate work. So what I realized as I started working with ICUL is, it gave me the opportunity to work with a lot of startups. And as we started interacting, right, during a due diligence process or during a transaction process, I started getting more involved and inquisitive about their business, how the business works, the streams of revenue, how they are structuring it, etc. And to a point where one of the founders actually asked me, am I from the business team or the legal team? Because he was introduced to me as being part of the legal team. So it was very interesting. And I realized that, when you work with startups, it's not just about understanding the legal implications and things like that, right? They kind of reach out to you for their everyday operational queries. It need not necessarily have a legal impact, but the kind of rapport that you build, it goes a little beyond the legal counsel realm. So when I realized I started enjoying doing that kind of work, I also wanted to move back into a space which gave me lot more opportunities in that. And Dwara came as the right fit at that particular point of time, and the corporate culture at HUL and the work that I did with ICUL was a perfect fit for the corporate and the transactional work at Dwara. So it was a natural fit and a move, and then I've thoroughly enjoyed being here. It's been about 2 years now, so it's been a very, very interesting journey.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think what you're saying about the experience that HUL and then at IC, and especially the kind of variety of stuff you're doing. When you're working at a kind of portfolio company like Dvara Holding, it probably comes in good stead in trying to give input to across all the different entities.
Definitely, because Dwara has about roughly about 8 portfolio companies, and currently 5 of those are startups, right? And I've actually grown with the teams here, and it's been a very huge learning curve, because what also happened is 3 months into me being with Dwara, COVID hit. The pandemic hit, and it was essentially baptism by fire, because one, I was just grappling with the situation and understanding the kind of business that they're doing, and then the pandemic accelerated the whole process. So that way, I'm really thankful that the kind of exposure that we get to the business aspects here and the kind of involvement from that team and the legal team makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned before that you're essentially the first legal and compliance head at Dvara Holdings. So you had your natural baptism of fire with being with the pandemic and all that hitting, but you're also you've got this legal compliance function that you're now in charge of and having to build that up. So how did one was, be good to know what was the expectation of management when they brought you in terms of, okay, we've got you in. Now, what do you do? What were they looking for? So that'd be the first question. Be nice to address, and then from there, understanding what exactly is going on within the department and the business. From trying to understand the process, the tech gaps that exist.
Sure, great. So yes, as you mentioned, I was the first person to head the legal and compliance function at Dvara Holdings. So to be honest, when I started, there were 2 compliance professionals other than me. There were no lawyers per se. So we had company secretaries. So the compliance aspect was being taken care of. And a lot of legal work was being outsourced. So it was not, there were no specific processes that were built out, because there was no team inside essentially. So considering that most of the work was outsourced, I think the first kind of expectation from my end was to understand where were the interactions happening, right? Because there's no legal team internally, and where does a business approach you? At what aspects do they look out for the legal team or look out for the compliance team? Because as I mentioned earlier, they were also startups and they were also growing their business. So at what stage or at what particular point does legal get involved in that was something that had to be assessed at first. And in terms of expectations from the management, to be honest, it was, I was given a very, I would say that a very wide scope to work on, and there were no restrictions per se, right? So first was for me to understand the businesses that they were doing. Second is to assess what role legal or compliance has to play in those particular businesses. And also assessing if regulatory we fell in somewhere at all. Because, for example, these are not the kind of businesses that we do need not be regulatorily, then do not fall under the ambit of regulators predominantly. We work a lot in the fintech space, right? So, for example, there could be a RBI or SEBI implication, which has a side implication on your business, and it doesn't regulate your business per se. So one was to understand what would be the nature of work that would be required of me, which itself took about 6 months' time, because what are the buckets of work that I would be doing? So that 6-month learning journey, I understood at the end of it that, okay, there's a bit of transactional work, there's a bit of regular business contracts, and there is a regulatory assessment, right? Because the legal team essentially right now is not just compliance oriented or, it should be a business enabler, and that's how the management expectations were set as well. So are you a business enabler? Are you agile to kind of work with the speed at which the business is working? So I think that took that 6-month learning journey to assess what exactly we were doing, where our interactions were happening, building rapport with the business team, stakeholders, etc., and then understanding what essentially was required of me. So that's how it's been.
Yeah, and it's pretty a great tip, because sometimes when you're a business and you bring someone in-house, and especially at senior level, kind of expect that they're going to start adding value straight away, right? You don't always have the patience to be like, actually, it's going to take a bit of time. And you're saying it took you about 6 months to figure out what is your role, especially because you were the first of its kind within the business. So first understanding your role, then what's business expectation of you. So I think it's interesting to know that actually we need to have patience as business heads and business management to look at anyone coming in cannot always just hit the road running and start adding value straight away.
Sure.
So it took you obviously about 6 months to figure out what your role is, how you're going to support the business, etc. Then what about that kind of process of understanding? Okay, what are the gaps in the department now? So so you've figured out, this is my job, this is how I'm going to support the business. How did you then go about figuring out what are the deficiencies and how the department's running, how you're interacting with the business, and whether they're using the right kind of tech tools or not?
Yeah, in fact, that process was easier, because all you had to do is speak to your business team on what were the pain points and what basically, because I would say in terms of process or tech, I wouldn't say there was a gap, because there was no requirement at that particular point to have built out a very formalized system of processes or tech at that stage, right? Because as I mentioned, most of the businesses are growing, and tech is something I feel has to evolve with the growth of the business, correct? So at that point, my first assessment was, okay, basically speaking to the business team and the internal stakeholders to understand that, yes, you have a problem. What is that I can do to assist you with that, and basically make life simpler, because tech need not necessarily mean complex tools or solutions. It could be something as simple as basically figuring out where your contracts are, right? Basically figuring out whether you have an Excel sheet capturing each of the contracts that your entities are entering into. I think in terms of assessing gaps, the first thing I assessed is, where are the process timelines currently at, and what could we do to reduce turnaround times? And the second aspect was, where's the information? Because it's people driven essentially, right? One person comes in and then the other person goes, and then it essentially means that you need to have a repository built in at your end to track what are the contracts that have been executed, what are the deals that are going to come up, what is the business plan that your entity is looking at, where are the checkpoints where you need to be involved, those kind of things. So I think what is critical is, and at that point, was understanding the process. So what I could assess at that point was that we didn't have document repository, in the sense that it was not all at one place. Different business teams had it, it could be HR, or it could be finance, or it could be, so figuring that out and building out a central depository. And secondly, in terms of just tracking the status of your contract, something has come in, because there are multiple entities, right? A couple of entities could have sent out something really urgent, which requires a quick turnaround time of a day or two. And then there are other 5 entities who also come to you with those timelines, right? So kind of tackling all of that, the process gaps is what I was looking at initially, because tech is something, once you align your process, you can figure out where the pain points are, and then go out and assess, what kind of tech will help you enable that process and make it far more efficient. So that's how we started doing it, and that's how we kind of assessed where we need to contribute.
Yeah, super. I mean, super example of that, how to just go about thinking through that kind of process of, like I said, process gap first, and then, okay, we can figure out an internal process, but where there's tools, whether it's internal or external tools in the market that can help with that, the process issues you faced, kind of a great understanding of that. How long did that kind of, that process of figuring out what are the process gaps and the pain points take, for you, at Dwara?
So it was those initial 6 months, right? So I think it also got accelerated because of the pandemic, because you suddenly didn't have access to physical documents anymore. Not just you, across your operations, across your teams, none of them had access. And I think in a way it played to our strength, in the sense we had to get things automated quickly. And so I would say the process overall took about 6 months to assess the process perspective, not the tech perspective, but the process perspective. And in those initial 6 months, thankfully, before the pandemic hit, we'd also kind of looked at an e-signing solution, right? And that just happened because of the number of documents we were signing. It was not pandemic induced. It was not something that had to happen because we didn't have access to physical documents. It also evolved organically, and that's something I was quite surprised myself, because as soon as the pandemic hit, the first tool that helped us in kind of seamless working and execution of documents was an e-signing tool. And so I would say within those 6 months, the process, and to an extent addressing one pain point in that process, kind of helped in figuring out where we need to address and what problems we need to address.
Yeah, super. I mean, Shashwat, I'm going to bring you in now. So you work with, a lot, dozens and dozens and 100+ kind of corporates and law firms as well. So, and you've been through the journey that, Janani's talking about, from understanding, she's identified quite clearly. First, you figure out what is the business looking for from a legal team, and then what she was doing was trying to figure out the pain points in the business and trying to solve them, then look at, right, here's the process. Then once you figured out the process, then she's like, okay, are there tools out there to support that process? So from your experience, supporting, advising clients, what's your advice with regards to, how you go about looking at the process gap and then the tech gap?
Yeah. So, so one interesting thing, right? I mean, so prior to founding Provakil, right? I mean, so I worked at a startup, right? And I was, at that point in time, I think I had a very close brush with legal, because what I was doing with the company initially really involved a lot of legal stuff. And that was my first brush with legal, right? And like that experience just comes back to me when, I hear Janani talk, right? I mean, I am so inspired by what Dwara is trying to do, and the whole structure and the type of entities, and I'm sure it's a place buzzing with ideas of new things coming up every week, every month, and a lot of unpredictability in what you're trying to do, right? So it is very hard to build processes when the business itself is not very stable, right? The business itself is in the process of discovery. So when we talk about process and tech, you have to look at large stable organizations very differently, and new age tech startups and tech enabled businesses really differently, right? I mean, so I'll tell you about an experience I had, right? I mean, so I worked with Oyo Rooms before this. I was an early employee there. So when I got there, it was about a team of about 70-80 people, 100 odd people, right? And they had just started expanding, right? And so I was part of the central supply team. So our job was to get more hotels on board. And every city, we were launching new cities. We were onboarding different types of properties, different types of models in which we were onboarding those properties. And my job was expansion, right? So expand to new cities, and then within those cities, go deeper and hire more people, right? And then, I used to work closely with the guy who used to head this vertical centrally. And the first large project that I really worked upon there was standardization of contracts, right? So we soon realized 2 months. So when I went in there, first month we grew 6x, right? In the first month, we grew our supply 6x. And then that is how the plans of the company were over the next year or so, right? And then in a month, we realized this is now beyond our control. What is happening? We have no visibility on what a growth guy is doing on ground, right? What are we signing? What terms are we getting into? which contract is expiring, what happened in the last 1 week, we have no visibility, right? And we had essentially just as a, made a 3-page, 4-page contract and given it out, and everybody was doing their bit, right? I mean, they all had targets. They were just going out and signing whatever they could, right? The homeowner said, the hotel owner said, okay, this particular clause does not work for me. So they were like, everything's done. The commercials are finalized. Why will I argue for this clause, right? And then that manager would go out and delete that clause and get the contract signed. Or we had 3 agreed upon deal structures, and the owner would introduce one new dimension to that deal, and the sales guy would say, okay, fine, as long as I have a deal, it is done, right? And so we soon realized, I did this audit I took a team of 2 people with me, and I did this audit, and we found out that we had 17 different contract types floating around. We had 17 different contract types for a single contract, right? So people had created 17, 18 different versions of the same contract, and it was all going around, right? Now, this is very different from, let's say, Hindustan Unilever. They will never face problems of this nature, right? Their process problems are of different nature because they have to find what is broken in their current process and things like that. Here, what I was doing, I knew that it had a shelf life of 6 months. We'll probably be doing different things 6 months later, right? But that was my first close shave with legal. And, so just getting things standardized, building that process, forget about tech tools, right? Just making sure that, there is no mechanism by which, the core legal interests of the company are getting, exposed in any fashion or what, right? So in that exercise, we developed a process. That process went out. Then we tried to evaluate tools on which we could implement that process, right? Because while Oyo was building most of its tech in-house, but this was not our forte, right? We wanted to build tech for hotels. We wanted to build consumer-facing tech for our mobile application and things like that. So then the call we took was, we can't wait to build this in-house. We have to go out and find an application which will support this, right? Now, the reason I'm narrating all of this is, see, at this point in time, I am still the business guy. My KPI was onboarding more hotels, right? So I am not the legal guy. I really did not care about whether that contract had the force majeure clause, whether the contract had XYZ. My thought process of thinking was still very from the business. What will get us to sign hotels quickly? And commercially, there should be no ambiguity in what we are doing, right? What I was solving was for commercial ambiguity and speed of execution, right? While we grow, right? So because, a guy who gets onboarded on our team was signing hotels on the 3rd day, right? The 2-day onboarding, and 3rd day that person is out in the field signing, right? So while I did all of this, I think Oyo hired their first general counsel 6 months after I came in, right? Before this, as Janani said, right? There was two people in legal, both the company secretaries, and their job was to work with the CEO, right? I mean, and there were law firms and external legal counsel who were advising on the fundraising process and XYZ, a lot of legal work that was happening, but none of it was related to the core business operation, right? And when the general counsel came in, it was a little bit of, from the business side, it was a little bit of hesitation as well as irritation. And, because suddenly all of what you had done was again put into question, and there were real problems brought out. And it was a learning experience for me as well, right? I mean, but so the central point that I'm trying to make over here is that, in early stages in a company, right? What I have started realizing is, and now the newer startups that I see have realized is, because they have people like me who worked in early startups earlier, so they realize this very early. So they also understand that having that legal as a strong stakeholder right from the very beginning is very important, right? Because you don't want to do this after you're already there in 100 cities, after you've already signed 10,000 contracts on ground, and then cleaning it up is a very, very hard. Trust me, I mean, in Oyo, we spent a lot of resources just to clean up on what we had already done, right? It is considerable resources, revenue going into it, right? So businesses have already started realizing that, you have to plan for this well in advance. And, I went to an engineering school, and I had no background in law till then, right? I mean, now I can say I've worked with enough lawyers to understand a bit of law, right? So I can probably read a contract and figure out the 4 things that we should be really mindful of when we're reading that contract, but still very naive, right? So having that legal expertise in the business process is extremely important, right? And young startups, especially tech-enabled businesses, need to do it right in the very beginning because they scale really fast, right? So you don't want that all of that to come, much after you've already scaled, right? And then I think from a tech standpoint, some of the decisions that companies take, what to buy, what to build, I think initially some of those, if you have the process figured out, some of those tools can be built in-house as well, right? I mean, see, you only need, so the contract management system, let's say a Dvara Holdings might need today, and let's say a Unilever might need today, I have different levels of complexity, right? So maybe Unilever really needs a designed, really in-depth contract management system, but Dwara might need like a document management system on which they can manage their workflows. And that is what sees them through for the next 1 year, 2 year, and then they decide whether they want to invest further, go into those fancy tools or not, right? Because again, that comes with its own, it will come at the cost of growth, right? So do you prioritize growth at that point in time more, or do you prioritize, properness at that point in time more, is the question you have to answer. And so that is the call that, the business and the legal have to take together. So some tools you will go out and get the most, advanced tool for that particular nature. And some you will just say that, we already have a tech process in-house, and this can, because one other thing is that business processes and those legal processes have to be tightly integrated. So sometimes it makes sense doing it on in-house tools as well, right? Right now, I'm being a legal tech vendor, I'm not doing too much service to our business by advising companies to look at in-house options for tools. But again, that's the reality, right? I mean, that's the reality. Sometimes it's going to be faster and more aligned if you do it in-house with other business tools that are in the pipeline. So again, I think that is the lens that this is advice focused towards young companies, startups, does not really apply to larger, more established companies. There, it's a very different process for evaluation of these things.
Yeah. So main tip is for the startup ones and the fintech companies, get your legal in first before your sales guys.
Very true. In fact, I can totally.
That's never going to happen, Vikas.
No, I can totally relate to what Shashwat was saying earlier, because very honestly, at Dwara, we have the advantage. The business team kind of involves us from the beginning. So when you're doing a product, structuring or conceptualization, right? Something as simple as when you're building out a B2C app, your landing page, how does the user experience feel? Where do you have to place your, I accept the terms and conditions tick mark, the consent, data protection, privacy, all of those things, right? So it's very interesting because, I'm lucky to work with a set of business teams which understand that it's easier to do the risk management process from the inception rather than having built out the entire, product. Structuring the product and going and marketing it, and the end realizing that, okay, these two drivers should not even be there, and this is how this should have been structured, or this is, this could lead to a breach, and then figuring out and kind of revamping. So that way, we've been lucky because even in terms of how the product design is, how the app feels, where do you have your terms and conditions, how it gets displayed to the consumer, what kind of consents do you require. Things like, the data protection is still in the build stage, but what we've also done is look at that and GDPR and have built in those consents from the beginning itself, so that you don't have to go back and look at your product now to see if you satisfy those requirements. So I think getting legal involved, as Shashwat mentioned, though it may initially be a pain point, would be something that, whether be it a startup or otherwise, it may not work predominantly in mature companies because you have already processes and the scale has already been achieved. But in startups especially, I think that's a very good starting point for any team.
Yeah, I think great tips from both sides. Obviously, there's two sides to every coin, and you've got the battle for scale and like what Shashwat was saying, and then you've got Janani, what you were talking about is great to get your house in order first before you scale, and then suddenly you realize your foundations are not so strong. So just going back to the Dvara example, again, because you're obviously talking about your first 6 months understanding the business and the pain points, and then you started putting together the kind of processes that needed to be there to help you really function as a business enabler. You early on started looking at, simple tech tools like, e-signatures, for example. How do you just go about understanding which processes should be, which processes will require, good tech solutions to speed it up? So, how did you go about, after about 6 months, you figure out, okay, this is where we're at, and you know from your experience, you're already thinking 2, 3, 4 years down the line, and then you're having to already start looking at, right, we're going to need this, we're going to need that. So what's been that journey over the last couple of years in terms of understanding, right, this is where tech is going to come in to really support your role as a business enabler and the business's role of scale?
Sure. So that was once you understood the process, right? I think in a couple of earlier webinars as well, Navneet has spoken, Mohit has spoken, data is key, right? Once you get the data in place and you figure out this is what you have in front of you, and you understand the pain points, you understand the problem areas. So how do you figure out what tech you need at that point is, first is, what is that consumes most of the time, most of your time, right? See, if you're positioning yourself as a business enabler, are you dedicating your time to problems that business actually requires your help in? Or are you sitting and, going through, sifting through contracts, which is consuming, say, about, with turnaround times of 3 or 4 days, or, it also goes to the other side and comes back and things like that. So once you figure that out, where you have to divert your time and energy and focus on, the things that take up most of your time is something that you can automate, right? For example, what we started doing was, and I mean, this is something that we are still building as a part of the roadmap, was understanding that what contracts could be standardized or templatized in the first instance. And when you figure that out, mostly, you see very few, queries that come back to you. The business team understands the contract very well, and they know when to approach the legal team to kind of say, okay, these are the clauses that's not working. Do you want to relook at it? Second is also understanding, even to reduce that further, is figuring out a risk analysis, right? Most of the time, business is the team that is dealing with the other side and trying to push a contract, because they've already taken the hard step. They've already brought business to the table, right? And getting the legal documentation signed and the process rolled out is something that they are at the forefront of as well, because most of the times it's business is actually talking legal language. So when you do a risk analysis, okay, these are items where you can, give a leeway on. This is the second stage, this is the third stage. And when you build out that contract playbook, so when you templatize and you build out a contract playbook, the process takes care of itself. And the second part, the second rung of it is the risk management, right? Do you have a compliance tool in place? Like, your compliance need not be, predominantly only Companies Act, right? Depending on the nature of entity you're in, it could be factories, it could be RBI regulations, it could be SEBI regulations. And that's the second aspect of the risk management. That's very critical, because to be honest, at the end of the day, contract risks are still manageable, but compliance risks have, impact in terms of not just monetary impact, but non-monetary impact as well, right? So once you do that risk assessment, third part of it would be that, what's great to have, but not a must have, right? So for me at this stage, I don't see the necessity for a litigation management, because, I mean, touch wood, we are at a stage of developing businesses. We are customer facing entities, yes. There would be a requirement for a CRM, but not essentially a litigation management tool, because that comes at a later stage. So when you classify it into these categories, you just have to go out and identify those vendors who have tools in the market. It could be standard tools, or it could be something that's customized to your particular nature of business. And as Shashwat mentioned, if you have great tech teams in-house, you can get it built out internally as well, right? So I think when you're building out a roadmap and when you're doing that assessment, you need to figure out short-term goals for yourself, then the next 2 to 3 year goals, And then the final goals, in terms of completely digitizing the entire process end to end. And one thing I would also like to add is, so in terms of any adoption of tech or any legal tech solution or whatever it is, right? I would recommend that you start off using it internally in your system within the legal team, right? So you, whatever be it, there are, say, for example, in a contract resource management system, you would have users who could also be business users. That's how the system itself is poised. But what I would recommend is start off using it internally within your legal team, figure out how it works, do it, 2-3 months, give yourself feedback, give feedback to the vendor, see how easy it is to use, and if it's easy enough for a legal person to use, and then graduate it to a non-legal person or a business person. So when you templatize those things and you have those queries, and then they themselves can generate the contract. But before you give it off to them, for them, it shouldn't be, they shouldn't view it like, I have a legal team, I have someone to do this. Why should I be the one logging in and kind of, while yes, great, it would reduce my turnaround times, but I have many other priorities to get to. So I would definitely recommend that how you assess your legal tool or your processes or whatever it is first, are you comfortable enough using it, your internal team, and then moving it to your other stakeholders, the business stakeholders, and see the ease with which they can operate that.
Yeah, I think, great tips there in terms of, when you're gonna bring any tool in, make sure you test it first, because you're right. There's many times that it's businesses will just roll out. They've got something new and fancy and think, okay, this is going to help solve a lot of problems. They just roll it out, but then you're right. The business, and especially if it's I've done it in my team as well. Like when you get the sales guys trying to try new stuff, they're like, it just doesn't work. Like it's within a month or so you realize nothing's working and you're having to scrap the whole project and then you blame the tools, saying the tools not working for us. But I think what you mentioned, Janani, in terms of you've got to do the hard graft as a legal department to make sure the tool is working and solving the problems you think it should be solving for the business, and then you can confidently then roll it out to the business to say, look, this works, it'll make life easier for everyone and help you achieve your business objective. So we're going to start rolling this out.
Very true, because for me, in fact, that did happen with the e-signing tool, right? The nature of my entities is like, we started internally using it for executing documents. And then we have fintech entities in the group, which require execution of loan documents. We have an NBFC in the group, which also execute loan agreements, right? So when we started using the tool internally, and these stakeholders also started seeing the seamless process, they realized that their B2C apps as well as the customer facing apps are things which can have an API integration with this particular tool and also make their life easier. So not just was it for the internal legal department and the interstate contracts and all of that, it also became a tool which the business themselves could start using in their customer facing contracts. So I think that way, when you kind of tie it internally, test it out and see the cost benefit as well as the time benefit and the seamless operation, it's also a tool that can be adopted by your business team, and that's exactly what happened at Dwara. So
yeah, and that's a really great example of what we were saying right at the beginning, where you moved in house, and that whole concept of being a business enabler. The fact that traditionally businesses look at the legal department as more of a roadblock and okay, bit of a pain. We want to go and get our contracts in. We want to go do our deals, and then we've got all these restrictions from legal. But that's a great example of the business enabler bit, where you actually facilitate scaling and getting more contracts in and doing more business. And it kind of puts the legal department, what you're doing, in a more positive light, so that you're working in partnership, with your business. Shashish, I just want to bring you back in on that one, because obviously you've got a lot of examples of there'll be clients that will think, okay, we want the full bells and whistle, and let's just take everything, and it will solve all our problems. And then a few months down the line, they're probably screaming at you or another tech guy saying, this doesn't work, product is no good, we're just going to scrap it. So what would your advice be from now you've been doing it so long of, okay, if you're going to look at the tech issue, this you mentioned at the beginning, in-house is also an option, and sometimes doing the simple stuff in-house is better than getting fully encompass tech tools. So what advice would you give?
So I'll change the frame of reference a little bit now, right? I mean, so let me talk a little bit about large, more established companies, right? I mean, so if you look at a more established company, right? Generally, they will have some process in place, right? I mean, it will not be I mean, you would still find a few where there will be no processes, but largely having a process in place is something that you can expect, right? Might not be really well defined, might not be very well implemented, but there is some process in place, right? And typically also aided by some tools, right? At least Excel, an Excel which is probably documented and maintained, at least that would be in place, right? I'll tell you what one of the key learnings that we've had over the last 1 year, and if I again, and we're really young, and I don't know if I'm capable enough to advise general counsels at this point, but one thing that I've noticed is like other business functions, legal, when you have a certain scale and size, right, you also have to start thinking of your department from an operational excellence point of view, right? I mean, you have to, all business verticals do that, right? Any process, sales will have a sales ops guy, right? Somebody who manages sales operations, right? Their job is not to go out and sell to the client. Their job is to look at the sales process and optimize it so that it is efficient. It is, efficient in terms of cost, efficient in terms of time, right? Lot of parameters, and they will measure those metrics and see how are we doing, what were we doing there, right? I see a lack of that in legal today, right? I mean, that realization is slowly flowing in, but it's still what we observe it that legal teams will hire a consultant like a PwC or an EY to come do an audit and then tell them what to do, right? I mean, what should be our tech stack, what should we do? I believe that especially for larger conglomerates, it would be a good investment to have a legal ops person in-house, right? I mean, somebody who is really looking at the operational side of legal, because the end of the day, a in-house legal team's job is probably they're not as much in there for the expertise as for their job is to find, if you have a high profile matter in the Supreme Court, the job is to find the best counsel suited to go and argue, right? You are not expected to go and argue that case, right? You're not, the job in my view, right, is not tasked to be the most well qualified lawyer on the team, right? It is to have that skill set where you can you are a resource manager, right? There is a budget that you're given, there is a business objective that you have, and within that budget, making sure that you are giving the best ROI, right, to the company, right? In terms of, so maybe you don't want to hire a really senior counsel for a matter which is not as critical importance, right? So that is the call that the general counsel and the legal team end up taking, right? And then in the legal function, I think one shift that has to come, and if you read Gartner's reports, right, I mean, of late, I mean, they've been mentioning this again and again, right? I mean, that legal teams over time will see a lot of non-legal staff, right? I mean, people who come in with a very different perspective, because, and that is, in case of, Dvara Holdings, in Janani's team, there will be ops people, right? Because they are running they're running a business at a different pace and a different style, and it will merit having people who are, not thinking like a lawyer, but thinking like, somebody whose job is to analyze a process, design processes. And so I think that is something that is, and that is why I said large teams, because, young companies will figure it out and they will do it, right? I mean, but the larger ones will really have to, it's a big change in the organizational hierarchy. Who does that person report to? Who's going to hire that person and things like that, right? So having that legal ops person or people in the team would be important, because then you are able to, there's somebody who's able to define operational objectives, some KPIs, right? I mean, not that you have to measure numbers always, but some KPIs on what you're doing. And then eventually see over time, legal becomes because being a cost center, there are always cost pressures, right? There are always times when you will be asked to cut down costs, and legal services, once you go outside right? I mean, they're expensive, right? Companies end up spending a lot of money for repetitive tasks, right? So I think over time there's going to be, as India sees more and more really large companies, because we are also as an economy, we are in that phase where we will see really, really large companies, right? And that is why these things will happen more frequently, right? Where then you have to really sit and optimize, what are my cost items? Where am I spending money? What cost can I reduce? And then those things become an important factor into choosing the tools that you want to implement. What is the, what chronology do you follow? Which tool comes in first and what goes out, and, what next, right? And those things, again, in the frame of reference for a large company, I think that is something that is a big change that has to happen. I hope that a lot of companies start realizing that and doing that sooner, because our experiences when we go in, right, the GC sort of uses us to do that, right? So when I go have those meetings with the general counsel, they were like, okay, you guys seem like you guys have good ideas around this. Like, we've done this for a lot of law firms, right? I mean, and early days, you're very, very keen. And so generally, again, you end up hitting off with the managing partner, and that guy will sit you down like, I am just tired of, like nobody understands what I want to implement over here. I have been through 2 cycles of 3 years each and nothing has moved. My firm is still running the same way. And they find it really hard, right? I mean, because see, again, different skill sets, right? So I think that is going to be a big change, and that can be a big enabler, right, for legal teams, right? Because everybody has, cost is one of the biggest KPIs. You have to really look at things of how you're doing things, and because there's always some other legal department which is doing it better, right? I mean, so there's always benchmarks that you could look at and do that. So it's very interesting, right? I mean, very, very, and we are seeing signs of that, right? So in a lot of large companies, right? So recently we implemented a tool at Unilever, right? I mean, so they had a consultant in that process for 6 months, right? 2-3 months of evaluation, 2-3 months of implementation. Multiple stakeholders coming in. Not a lot of people who are not from legal were involved in that process, and just to integrate it well to the business, right? Because there is a lot of data that today legal is that the legal team has, which is in the core. It has to go into the annual reports. A lot of things have to be submitted to the regulator. So critical information, the business will rely on legal to have that information, and hence that much importance as well to that process, right? So that is, I think, one key thing that I feel that large legal departments can look at and be a little more process driven, give it more importance. It will reduce risks, and it will bring down costs.
In fact, Shashwat, the fact that you said, there would be non-legal team members in the legal team, that's quite interesting, because other than the part you spoke about, the process excellence and operational excellence, one more field where I see this could happen is legal design, right? To be honest, something that struck me was, I don't know if you guys have seen this, there's this Domino's privacy policy, which is simply a slice of pizza, which explains to you in a very creative visual manner the kind of data that they collect, how long it's retained for, in terms of the toppings and things like that. So when you are a customer facing entity, right, it does, yes, the way the legal supports business is something very critical to look at, but are you building out stuff which is very comprehensible to your end customer is also something that you need to look at. So when you mentioned that, it would be filled with people who are not purely legal, I think legal design would also be something that, at least large customer facing entities will think through going forward, because nobody reads those verbose privacy policies, terms and conditions. To be honest, I'm a lawyer. I just go down, scroll, and click on those terms and conditions. But when it's presented in a very easily digestible manner, and at the end of the day, those are the kind of consumers you're working with, right? So if your consumer doesn't understand what you're trying to tell them, whether it be a 4-pager or a 40-pager, it really doesn't make sense. So how are you presenting that information, I think, would also be something that legal teams will start taking into consideration, visual contracts, audio contracts, and things like that. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. And that's also something we are seeing if we can implement in terms of, at least in terms of our privacy policy and things like that.
And I feel that can be a big business enabler as well, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, just imagine, like, if everybody has competition, right? If you interact with your customers in a more transparent fashion with very little cognitive overload, right? I mean, then you've already, really reduced the friction with the customer, right? Or with your vendor,
Very
right?
true.
And that can be a huge business enabler, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, right? I mean, very, very interesting things coming into the industry. And I mean, when the sales teams are doing it, the marketing teams are, I mean, if the marketing teams are making memes, the legal team can also make memes, right? I mean, everything is meme worthy today.
Shashwat, just building on that whole, the whole kind of focus on, the legal design bit, the business enabling bit. And you would have seen many customers, and even what Janani's doing at the moment. Okay, I'm getting, an e-signature tool, then I'm getting this tool, then that tool. And then you find that, you're using different providers to bring different tools in because they're meeting the need for, the short term, or maybe, short term to a year or whatever, or a couple of years. But, and then you suddenly find that, for example, you might go in and find like, oh God, they've got so many different tools, but the tools don't necessarily all talk to each other. So where you look at the sales function, the marketing function, you've got very good kind of holistic tools that can, plug across all of that, and like essentially a project management tool that connects the dots between, the CRM and then the accounting tool, etc. But legal, is probably not at that stage yet, especially in India. So what's your kind of advice with regards to this kind of building, a dashboard? Because what, GCs like Janani's looking at the data, and you see that the sophistication of the GCs has evolved so much in the last few years. And now that, they're talking not simply about, risk management or, getting the contract done, but it's very much for data. We need to look at the data, the pain point. So, what's your kind of, what's happening in that kind of dashboard legal project management space at the moment?
So it's very interesting because we have very strong views on it because as a legal tech vendor, there is, we have a certain thesis on what the market needs, right? And what should we be working on, right? What kind of tools should we be working on as a company, right? And this is our thesis, right? Our thesis is that you want to sell to both large and small companies. And for large companies, it's fine if they pick and choose what tool fits their needs the best. And because they have large teams, large resources, they can take their time implementing them. They can take their time integrating those different tools and buying another dashboarding tool for the final. So we have done implementations where so they have multiple legal tools that we have implemented, modules that we have implemented, and there are other modules. And then the management dashboard is on a dashboarding tool, and we've done APIs with those dashboarding tools as well, where pending contracts shows up on that tool, which is outside of Provakil, right? But so for larger companies, that luxury or of going out with different products for different needs can work out. Our thesis is for mid-sized companies and young companies, startups, having a single integrated platform is a big edge in my view, right? I mean, and that is what we are working towards, right? And it's very hard to achieve, right? It's generally very, very hard to solve for many things at the same time. And so the way we are trying to do this, our approach is that we've abstracted out the legal department and we're building the blocks for what does, so a team might need a litigation tool or a contract tool or a compliance tool or an IP tool, right? Or a notices tool, right? Or just a legal project management tool, right? I mean, different kind of things, right? So the way we are designing, we are taking a platform approach, right? We are building a platform. So as a general counsel, then, I might have one need today. I'll go to the vendor, I'll get that thing implemented. But then that platform itself, because it is designed in a fashion where, I don't know if you've heard of this, we've taken a no-code approach, right? So you can customize your workflows, you can customize your, data fields, you can customize the look and feel of the product, how it integrates. So we want to be a product which integrates to, so we have open APIs, anybody can come and integrate, right? Your IT team can integrate to our product without us being involved, right? Because it's open APIs, really clearly well defined, right? So our approach is that we believe that single integrated tool for legal. So we want to be the Gsuite for legal teams, right? So for the general counsel, we want to be the Gsuite. Like they open their Provakil dashboard and they can see their.
He's getting to the key point and he's just frozen. I think he's
Yeah.
about to give the answers away to everyone.
Yeah, I think Shashwat's back.
Shashwat, I think your competitor suddenly froze you, so you might want to talk about you're working on building the G Suite for the legal.
Yeah, so we're taking a G Suite approach, right? Where you have all those tools available, right? And the hard part is really abstracting out what does it mean, right? So for instance, there is a machine learning layer, right? That legal works with a lot of text. You can do text processing on litigation orders, judgments. You can do text processing on contracts. You can do text processing on IP, right? I mean, so across the board, machine learning can be a really powerful enabler, right? Across my product, right? I am building a text editor, right? Legal teams draft documents. They are stuck with Microsoft Word, and then any tool that they use does not have an inbuilt Microsoft Word. So they will keep struggling between Microsoft Word and that tool, right? So we're designing our own text editor. Everything has to be within the tool, right? We do data automation, right? So you have your compliances, you have your, data coming from courts, IPR registries. So we understand that it is not something that legal teams want to do. They don't want to sit and spend time on downloading information. So we want to build data integrations and making sure automations work, right? Whether it is external data or internal data. So that is how we think about a product. We don't think about a product from a litigation, compliance. Those are all, end use cases, right? So we're building that platform. So I feel that, a platform approach will win, right? That is something that is going to be extremely, powerful for GCs. And that is where the direction that they will go in, right? And then it becomes really easy, right? Because let's say I have a litigation today, which is related to a contract that I have. It's a commercial litigation. Then if both are on the same platform, then, pulling out that clause, which was controversial, is so easy. And looking at the history of that clause within the context of the litigation becomes so much more seamless and powerful, right? Or let's say I have a IP matter, and, if I have the trademark history in the matter itself, then, I have a lot more information, right? I'm not struggling between tools, right? And then having a, universal dashboard where I can see what things are pending at my plate, what are my team working on, what, just general dashboards for management and reports going out for management, right? So our approach as a company is that for smaller companies, this is what will work. And that is what we are building. That is what our approach is. And then when we work with larger, so for instance, Unilever they already had a contract tool in place. So they implemented our litigation tool, right? I mean, so they said that at this point in time, Unilever Global uses a single contracting tool. So that we are fine with that, right? You use one module, you use multiple modules, but most of the smaller mid-sized companies that we work with, there the general counsels will implement Provakil, and they will implement it sequentially, right? So if contracting is their biggest pain point today, they will just implement contracting. And then 6 months later, they will come back and say, okay, now we need this, now we need that, and everything. So a lot of our product development has happened through that, right? I mean, I am not a lawyer. So we've built these products sitting with general counsels and legal teams and understanding their pain points and really going deeper into it. What we are good at is, like my co-founder Pulkit, I think we've been in software for a decade now, and really understand how software works, right? So our approach is, if you look at the whole SaaS market today, right? I mean, software as a service, whether you look at marketing applications or sales or, in CRM or any industry, right? Everybody, the platforms that will win are which are doing the whole industry cloud approach, right? So for instance, we are building the legal cloud, right? That is our pitch. We are not building a CLM. We are building a cloud for the legal industry, right? You have a healthcare cloud. You have so basically HubSpot is a marketing cloud, right? Whatever the marketing team does, they can do it within HubSpot. That is HubSpot's pitch, right? And that is what we want to become for legal. And I think that is going to be really powerful. That's so again, I know your question was slightly different, but this is something that I really, this is a message that I really want to drive down, right? I mean, and I think a lot of teams that we interact with have started really utilizing that to their benefit. And that is what is going to happen, right? So it's very easy if you have a single platform where you're managing these things.
Shashwat, I have a wish list for you then. So when you're building out, considering you're building out this platform, something, as you say, it's all ML driven, AI driven, and you're able to read through the kind of contracts that, or the compliances that a particular entity is taking. So given the tech advancements in other fields and the fact that you can, AI and ML can pick up all of this, I don't know other GCs, but what I would like to see is, RBI and SEBI and all the other regulators, right, are actually going ahead of the curve and kind of regulating entities and coming up with, regulations and rules and requirements on pretty much an hourly basis, I would say, and that's really good because, it shows that they're also growing with the tech advancement. So in that way, if we can have something which, kind of brings in together the areas of governance your business is involved in, and automatically lets you know that this notification came, this could have an implication on something you're doing, and based on, the contracts that you've plugged into here, we see this could be something useful impacting your business, or this is something you have to take cognizance of and assess. So we are doing that offline right now currently, right? We are assessing all these regulations and figuring out how our businesses have to function. But if we have an automated tool that does that actually understands the areas that we operate in and also scores the, particular websites to bring immediate information and see how it applies, not just letting me know that there was this notification by SEBI on this and this day, but how does it apply, because you already have that data available. So yeah, that's something that's very interesting. And second thing I would say is the user interface. All of us as consumers are kind of used to easy shifting between windows, apps like Amazon, or the user interface is so simple that either whatever be it. But what we've generally seen with platforms is that there are too many drop-down menus. It just the information is not presented in a clear manner. But great that you're building out something that will enable all of this. So I hope the UI is also something that we are kind of used to in our daily lives. Yeah.
Yeah. So both the points, right? Janani, so UI, we really obsess over UI, right? And again, if you speak to my co-founder Pulkit, he's a product guy. He's the guy who's designing all of this, right? And so our belief is that business apps should not be boring. Business apps should not be difficult to use, and they should not be any different from consumer apps, right? So the experience that today you have using, let's say, a phone pay or a WhatsApp, applications that are designed for consumers, where nobody trains you how to use that application, right? You open that application, and within 5 minutes you have a hang of what's going on here, where can I find what, right? So that is the mandate that we have for our teams, and that is the filter which they go through. And obviously it's a journey, right? So we are a startup, right? You first get to a point where it's a minimal viable product, and then you build upon it, right? But I think UI and interface is going to be a huge USP, or something that is going to be a huge enabler for you winning the market, right? You can build out as many detailed functions, but if the user is not able to figure it out, then it's useless, right? It's pointless having those functionalities if it's hard to use, right? And that is why building software is hard. That is what people don't get, right? That is why building tech tools in-house is not a great idea, because your tech team is working on 15 different things. They're not going to obsess over customer, your experience on that, right? Their job is just getting the process implemented. But I have to service 300 enterprises and deal with 300 teams, and I understand their expectations and challenges, and it is in our interest to obsess over it, right? And so I totally, that is something that we take up as a challenge. We know, no tool is perfect, and that is something that we invest a lot of time, energy, and effort in it, right? So there are things, if I show you my quarterly roadmap of what we are doing on the product, from a module or a new feature point of view, there'll be very little in it, right? 80% of what we do is either deployment tools of how we can deploy this tool faster, how can we reduce the time for the customer to start using it, right? Or building things inside our tool which enable to solve issues which are related to customer experience, right? So how do you bulk upload things, bulk update things? These are not things which I can write on a piece of paper as a feature that I have, right? It's a user experience thing. And we spend about 75% of our time on these. And the third is security, right? I mean, again, we're dealing with data which is extremely confidential, like highly sensitive. So you have to really evolve your product and your applications to ensure that the client can trust their data on your cloud and servers, right? So these are the three things which occupy 75% of our development effort, and 25, it's just 25%, which is the new features, new things that we do, right? And on the second question, I think the bit you said about regulations and getting real-time updates on that. So this is back to back now. The last session we did with Mohit from Barclays, he had the exact same wish list that they would love if somebody could do that. It's a hard problem to solve, right? And I mean, we are very cognizant of that. It is on our product roadmap, right? I mean, so we want to do, so we look at, from a product standpoint, we look at 4 areas. I think litigation, disputes rather, and then contracts, IP, and compliance, right? So today we know that we have a really good product in litigation. We've been working on it for 5 years. I can safely say that it is the best product in the country, right? Contracts, we've been investing a lot for the last 2 years, and that is another area which this year we will invest a lot, right? So all our UI and MLAI related things in contracts is what we're doing. This compliance is something that we have a very basic version of the tool, and that's why for most of the clients, when they come to us for compliance, we either enable them through a partner or so it's just our product, but the data comes in from a partner today, right? But that is something that is definitely on our roadmap. I think it's a huge global problem and a huge global opportunity to solve global compliance that way. And it's definitely on our product roadmap for the coming years, right? So hopefully there will be a time when I could come back to you and say that, look at this.
Well, I don't think we'll be too far away. I mean, you guys have been working on it a while, and you've got many wish lists now to fulfill, Shashwat, at the Provakil team. I think great point from both you on the UI UX one, because we've seen even in the India market, many legal tech companies who've been around, decade plus, kind of really falter because they've not taken the UI UX bit seriously. They've built all-encompassing tools that solve all the problems you want to, but it's just frustrating as an experience. And I think when we were doing the kind of call with Janani before, she was like, as a consumer, you're used to, Netflix, Amazon, Flipkart, you're used to all these consumer apps that you then apply the same expectations to a business application. So I think that's the challenge, that, how do you deliver those kind of needs?
And I want to make a small point over here, right? I mean, so
another plug.
Another plug, but yeah. So the way we are trying to solve this problem, right? I mean, see, end of the day, as product managers or software developers, you can only solve a problem when you face it, right? There has to be somebody. So today inside Provakil, we manage all our processes on the Provakil platform. So we manage all our contracts on Provakil. So we do about 15 contracts a month, right? So we know the hassles of doing contracts, right? So when we start using the tool, if the tool is not working for me, it's most probably not working for my customers as well, right? So that is a very strong feedback loop, right? We are filing trademarks, so all of those things, right? And other internal processes also, right? We are building on our platform, right? So for instance, a lot of our general counsels use Provakil as a query management tool, right? Anybody in the company has to send in a query. They have to keep a record of that query. A lot of those things we also use in-house. So a lot of our in-house operations run on Provakil. So we are able to figure out, okay, this is a really annoying thing, right? How are customers dealing with it, right? So that is a hack, right? I mean, that we use to improve our product in terms of user experience. And yeah.
All right, super. On that point, we've actually overrun. I thought we were going to be short of time, but we've actually overrun on time. So it's been a great conversation. I really want to thank you, Shashwat, and you, Janani, in terms of giving that real understanding of building a roadmap from, obviously this is more from a startup point of view, but some of that will be applied even at the larger scale departments when they're trying to solve business problems. I think the nice kind of point of view was you're really looking at how starting point is, what are the problems business are facing? What are the problems legal are having to manage for them? And that's where you start this whole conversation. Then figure out how do I solve this problem? And then eventually where does tech come in to facilitate solving that problem faster and faster. You know, and in that, we've got a whole bucket list now for Shashwat and the team to keep working on. I'm sure we'll start seeing releases soon as well, you know, hitting the market. But thank you so much for being part of the conversation, taking time out. And you know, I wish you all the best and good evening.
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. Thanks for having me here, and thanks, Shashwat. I hope
you.
you work on the wish list soon. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.